Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My grandfather froze to death on the kitchen floor in the middle of summer, and I'm the only person who knows what happened. My grandfather froze to death on the kitchen floor in the middle of summer, and I'm the only person who knows what happened. My mom found him early on the morning of July 15th, stretched out between the refrigerator and the breakfast table like he'd been reaching for something. His skin was blue-white, ice crystals still clinging to his eyelashes when Mom screamed from the doorway. The thermometer on the kitchen wall read 82 degrees. I'm Theo, 17, part-time sandwich artist at Subway. Full-time disappointment to my parents' college fund expectations. Normal kid from normal Midwestern stock. The kind who knows the difference between a blizzard watch and a blizzard warning. Who can drive in snow before I can parallel park. I played JV basketball badly and worked the closing shift 3 nights a week, biking home past empty storefronts and gas stations that close at 10. Nothing about my life prepared me for finding my grandfather's body that morning or for understanding what had happened. My grandpa, Isaac, had lived with us for 4 years, ever since Grandma died and Dad decided the old man shouldn't be rattling around their farmhouse alone. Grandpa was 74. With arthritis in his hands and a habit of falling asleep in his recliner with the TV remote balanced on his chest. He'd worked 20 years managing the local IGA before retiring, knew everyone in town, remembered their kids' names, and which checkout girls gave the best customer service. He was practical, steady, unremarkable in every way that mattered. He was also dead in our kitchen, ice cold in 80-degree weather. The coroner, Dr. Willits, spent 45 minutes examining the body. He took photographs, checked the thermostat, questioned Mom and Dad about Grandpa's health, his medications, whether he'd seemed confused or disoriented lately. He measured the room temperature 3 times with different thermometers, frowning at readings that made no sense. Hypothermia, he announced finally, signing papers with the kind of confidence that comes from 3 decades of determining cause of death. Severe hypothermia due to unknown environmental factors, possibly a neurological episode affecting temperature regulation. Dad asked the obvious question. How does someone freeze to death when it's 80 degrees outside? Dr. Willits adjusted his glasses and delivered the answer that would satisfy the insurance company, the death certificate, and everyone except me. Sometimes the body's regulatory system fails catastrophically. Medication interactions, undiagnosed conditions, stroke affecting the hypothalamus. The body can literally lose the ability to maintain core temperature. Mom mentioned the frost she'd seen around the body, but Dr. Willits dismissed it as condensation from the air conditioning. I didn't correct him, even though our AC had been off for 3 days. The funeral was on Thursday. Half the town showed up, filing past the casket to pay respects to a man who bagged their groceries and remembered their faces for 2 decades. They spoke about his kindness, his reliability, how he'd given their teenagers first jobs and second chances. None of them knew about the temperature of his skin when they found him, or the thin layer of frost that had formed around his body, like he'd been lying there in January instead of July. None of them had seen what I saw when I came downstairs that morning, when Mom screaming brought me and Dad running. I saw my grandfather's final expression, frozen on his face in the moment death took him. He wore no peaceful look like most people would imagine. His eyes were wide, staring at the ceiling, and his mouth was open like he'd been trying to say something important. He looked terrified. Strange things started happening 2 months ago. May 28th in Minnesota means tornado watches and sudden thunderstorms, the kind of weather that keeps you checking the sky every few minutes. It doesn't mean finding patches of kitchen floor. So cold, they make your feet ache through wool socks. But that's exactly what I found that Tuesday morning after Memorial Day, a circle of tile near the sink that felt like stepping on January pavement. Mom blamed the air conditioning. Even though we hadn't turned it on yet, Dad checked the basement for broken pipes. Crawling around with flashlight and muttering about foundation settling, the cold spot vanished by Thursday. But another one appeared in the hallway upstairs. Then another in the living room by the weekend. Old houses settle, Dad said when I mentioned it. Foundation shifts creates drafts you wouldn't expect. Our house was built in 1987. It wasn't exactly old by anyone's standard. Dad liked cheap explanations that didn't require calling repair services. I pressed my palm against the frigid patch of living room carpet, watching my breath form small clouds in the 70-degree air. When I called Mom over to feel it, her hand passed through the cold like it wasn't there. "Feels normal to me, honey," she said, giving me that concern look parents get when they think you're coming down with something. But I could see the frost forming on the carpet fibers where my breath hit them. The winter wind started a week later. I'd be watching TV or doing homework and suddenly smell snow in the air, that sharp, clean scent that comes before a blizzard. The smell would drift through rooms like invisible smoke, carrying whispers I could almost understand. Once I followed the scent upstairs to Grandpa's room, where he was sitting on his bed looking at old photo albums, his face pale and distracted. "You smell that?" I asked him. He looked up from a picture of him and Grandma at some company picnic. His hands were shaking as he closed the album. "Smell what?" "Like snow. Like winter. It's May, Theo." But his voice cracked when he said it, and I noticed he was wearing a sweater despite the warm afternoon. The whispers came with the wind that smelled like snow, voices so quiet I couldn't be sure I was actually hearing them. Sometimes they seemed to be calling a name, sometimes just murmuring like people having a conversation in another room. I'd turn my head to catch the words, but they'd fade into nothing, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined them entirely. But Grandpa heard them too. I'd find him sitting in his chair at midnight, eyes wide open, responding to things the rest of the family couldn't detect. "I'm sorry," he'd whisper to the empty room. "I know you're cold. I know." When I asked him who he was talking to, he'd look at me with the desperate expression of a drowning man. "You can hear them too, can't you, Theo?" His voice barely above a whisper. "The voices in the wind." I nodded, and something between relief and terror crossed his face. "Then you know she's coming." The shivering started in June. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, teeth chattering, pulling my covers tight around me. The room would feel normal to everyone else, maybe even warm, but my body acted like I'd been sleeping outside. When I mentioned it to Mom, she immediately started checking for fever and asking about my appetite. "Growing boys need more calories," she said, adding extra bacon to my breakfast. "Your metabolism's probably just running high." She couldn't see the frost forming on my bedroom windows while the thermostat read 75 degrees. Grandpa started acting strange around the same time, but this was different from the whispers. This was paranoia. He began looking over his shoulder when we watched TV together, checking the locks on doors that nobody ever used. During dinner, he'd pause mid-sentence and listen to sounds the rest of the U.S. couldn't hear, his fork halfway at his mouth, eyes darting toward the kitchen doorway. "Nothing there," he'd mutter when I followed his gaze. "Just tired." But tired people don't spend 20 minutes staring at the same photograph, and they don't whisper apologies to themselves while they think no one's listening. I started finding him with those photo albums more often, usually the ones from his working years at the IGA. He'd flip through pages slowly, his finger tracing faces I didn't recognize, his lips moving in silent conversation. One afternoon in late June, I found him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, still in his pajamas, staring at the spot where his body would be found 3 weeks later. The linoleum around his bare feet was covered in frost that sparkled under the overhead light. "Grandpa," he turned toward me, but his eyes took a moment to focus, like he was seeing me from across a great distance. When he exhaled, his breath formed a small cloud between us. "She's coming," he said quietly. "She's been walking through the snow for 27 years, and now she's almost here." "Who's coming?" I should have stopped. I should have helped her. His voice was barely audible, but she was so cruel, Theo. So very, very cruel. I asked him what he meant, who he was talking about, but he just shook his head and shuffled back to his room, leaving wet footprints on the kitchen floor that steamed in the warm air. Everything came together the night I saw her. It was July 4th, just past midnight. Fireworks had been going off all evening. Late celebrations from people who bought too many bottle rockets and didn't want to waste them. I was lying in bed, listening to the occasional pop and crackle from somewhere across town, when the temperature in my room dropped 20 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. I sat up, pulling my sheet around me, and saw her floating 3 feet above the hallway carpet. She was translucent, like looking through ice, but I could make out her basic shape, a woman in what might have been a winter coat, her hair hanging in frozen strands around her face. Snow clung to her shoulders and sleeves, never melting, never falling. She moved without walking, drifting down the hall toward Grandpa's room with the deliberate purpose of someone who knew exactly where she was going. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as she passed my doorway, leaving a trail of frost on the walls where she'd been. The air around her shimmered with cold, and I could hear the sound winter makes, that particular silence that comes with heavy snow, broken only by the soft whisper of ice crystals forming. She turned her head toward me as she passed, and for just a moment I saw her face clearly. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and empty and cold enough to freeze blood. Her mouth was open in an expression that might have been speaking, but no sound came out, just that patient, terrible silence. When she reached Grandpa's door, she didn't open it. She simply passed through the wood like it was made of mist. I stayed in bed until morning, wrapped in every blanket I owned, listening to the one-sided conversation that drifted through the walls. Grandpa's voice, apologizing over and over to someone who answered only with the sound of wind through bare trees. By the time the sun came up, the temperature had returned to normal, but I found a single perfect snowflake on my windowsill, refusing to melt despite the July heat. I knew then that my grandfather was going to die, and that I was the only one who would understand why. My grandfather told me the worst thing he'd ever done. It was July 13th, 2 days before we found him dead on the kitchen floor. He'd spent the morning pacing between his bedroom and the kitchen, muttering under his breath and checking door locks that were already secure. The house felt like a meat locker despite the air conditioning being off, but only Grandpa and I seemed to notice. By afternoon, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "Theo," he said, finding me in the garage where I was fixing a flat tire on my bike. "I need to tell you something. About Mary." I'd never heard him mention anyone named Mary before, but something in his voice made me set down my wrench and pay attention. He looked older than his 74 years. His shoulders bent forward like he was carrying something impossibly heavy. When he breathed, small puffs of vapor escaped his lips despite the stifling heat. "I worked at the IGA for 20 years, he began, settling onto Dad's workbench with careful movements. Made some good friends there. Jimmy in produce, Alice in customer service, Bill who ran the meat counter." He paused, his hands working against each other in his lap. "And then there was Mary." The temperature in the garage dropped 10 degrees when he said her name. She worked in the office. Bookkeeping, scheduling, handling complaints. Been there longer than anyone, maybe 15 years when I started. Everyone called her Mean Mary behind her back, though never where she could hear it. His voice got quieter, more distant, like he was saying something I couldn't. Mary had a talent for finding people's weaknesses and pressing on them until they broke. New employees, part-timers who couldn't afford to quit, anyone she thought was beneath her. But what she did to Tommy was the day I knew she was something beyond cruel, beyond human, maybe. The Tuesday she destroyed Tommy was like watching a predator hunt. Tommy worked maintenance, had some kind of developmental delay that made him talk slowly and repeat himself sometimes. Sweet kid, maybe 25, lived with his mother and needed that job more than anything. A customer complained about water on the floor near produce. Standard stuff, happens every day. Grandpa's breath came out in visible puffs now, and frost began forming on the workbench where his hands rested. Mary saw her chance. She called Tommy over to the customer service counter, where everyone could see, employees, shoppers, kids waiting with their mothers. Started interrogating him about his careless mopping, making her voice loud enough for the whole front end to hear. I could see the scene playing out in his eyes, 27 years of guilt etched in the lines around them. Then she started imitating his speech. made her voice slow and halting like his, stumbling over words the way he did when he got nervous. Tommy, sorry. Tommy, try harder. She kept getting louder, drawing more people over to watch this grown man being humiliated like a child. The frost was spreading now, crawling up the garage walls in delicate patterns that caught the afternoon light. Tommy just stood there holding his mop, tears streaming down his face. He didn't understand why everyone was laughing. Mary wasn't done. She told the customer, loud enough for everyone to hear, that Tommy was mentally deficient and that the store kept him on out of charity. Said maybe they should find someone more capable to clean up after normal people. Grandpa's voice broke completely. The customer looked horrified, tried to say it wasn't that big a deal, just a wet floor. But Mary kept going, called Tommy a burden on decent society, and said his mother should be ashamed for inflicting him on normal people. Tommy collapsed right there, sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe. He never came back. Found out later his mother had to take him to the emergency room that night because he wouldn't stop shaking. The doctor said it was a panic attack, but I knew better. Mary had broken something inside him that never got fixed. The frost had covered every surface in the garage now, turning our breath into clouds and making the metal tools ring like bells when expanding ice shifted them. That was the kind of person Mary was, Grandpa whispered. Someone who could destroy an innocent man for entertainment and sleep soundly that night. I asked him why he was telling me this, what Mary had to do with the cold spots and whispers that followed us through the house. His hand stopped moving. When he looked at me, his eyes were wet and desperate, because I'm the reason she's dead. The story came out slowly, like he was pulling each word from somewhere deep and painful. February 14th, 1998, 7 years before I was born, a blizzard had moved in faster than predicted, dropping 19 inches of snow in 6 hours and creating whiteout conditions across 3 counties. Store management made the call to close early, 2 in the afternoon instead of 9 at night. Everyone was anxious to get home before the roads became completely impassable. Mary had left first, as she always did. She lived alone in a rented house on the other side of town and drove an old Buick that wasn't reliable in the best conditions, let alone in a blizzard. Grandpa had stayed another hour, helping secure the store and making sure all the coolers and freezers were properly sealed in case they lost power. By the time he left, the snow was falling so hard he could barely see his truck in the parking lot. I took County Road 47, he said. It was faster, and your grandmother was waiting with dinner. I'd driven that road 1,000 times. His voice got quieter, forcing me to lean closer to hear. I saw her headlights first, flashing on and off, like someone signaling for help. The Buick was nose first in a snowbank, maybe 15 yards off the road. As he got closer, he could see Mary standing beside her car, waving her arms frantically. Even through the snow and wind, he could tell she was in trouble. I pulled over, he said, sat there with my engine running, looking at her through my windshield. She was walking toward me, stumbling through knee-deep snow. The garage was freezing now, cold enough that I could see my own breath mixing with his in the space between us. I thought about Tommy crying while everyone laughed, about the way she called him deficient, a burden. I thought about the kind of person who could destroy someone like Tommy and sleep soundly that night. His hands were shaking now, from the cold or emotions, I couldn't tell. She reached my truck, started pounding on the passenger window with her fists, screaming something I couldn't hear over the wind. Her face was pressed against the glass, and I could see the terror in her eyes. She knew she was going to die out there if no one helped her. He paused, his breath coming in short, sharp puffs that crystallized in the air. I put the truck in drive and kept going. The words hung between us like icicles. She ran after me for maybe 20 yards, waving and screaming. I watched her in my rear-view mirror until the snow swallowed her up. Then I drove home and told your grandmother I'd taken the main route because it was safer. They didn't find Mary's body until March, when the snow finally melted enough for a farmer to spot something that didn't belong in his field. She made it almost a mile from her car before the cold took her, found frozen in a drainage ditch with her arms wrapped around herself, still wearing the same winter coat I'd seen floating through our hallway. I killed her, Grandpa whispered. And I've been living with that for 27 years. The frost had covered every surface in the garage now, turning our breath into clouds and making the metal tools ring like bells when the expanding ice shifted them. She's been walking through that blizzard ever since, he said, walking through the snow and the cold, getting closer every year, and now she's found me. I asked him why he was telling me this now, after keeping it secret for so long. He looked toward the house, where shadows were beginning to gather in the windows as evening approached. Because she's here, Theo. She's been in my room every night for a week, standing at the foot of my bed, dripping snow melt on the carpet. She doesn't say anything, just watches me with those frozen eyes. His voice dropped to almost nothing. And I think you're the only one who can see her too. The air conditioner stayed off for the last 2 days of my grandfather's life. After his confession in the garage, he became obsessed with heat. Every time someone turned on the AC to combat the mid-80s weather, he'd shut it off within minutes, his hand shaking as he adjusted the thermostat. Can't stand the cold air, he'd mutter, pulling on another sweater despite the sweltering house. When Dad complained about the temperature, Grandpa begged. Just keep it off, he pleaded. Please. The whispers were constant now, where before I'd barely been able to make out voices on the wind. Now I could hear words clearly left me. So cold. They drifted through the house like smoke, always in Mary's voice, though I'd never heard her speak when she was alive. Mom and Dad noticed Grandpa's behavior, but attributed to grief or maybe early dementia. They scheduled a doctor's appointment for the following week and talked in hushed voices about assisted living facilities and medication adjustments. They couldn't see the frost forming on windows despite the 80-degree indoor temperature. They couldn't see the way their breath became visible whenever they stood too close to Grandpa's usual spots. When I pressed Mom's hand against a wall covered in ice, her fingers passed through it like it wasn't there. Don't you feel that? I asked desperately. Feel what, honey? She looked at me with growing concern. Are you feeling all right? But I could see the frost spreading under her touch. Could feel the supernatural cold seeping through my clothes and into my bones. On July 14th, the day before he died, Grandpa stopped sleeping entirely. I found him in the living room at 2 a.m, fully dressed, staring at the front door. The house was stifling without air conditioning, but his breath formed steady clouds when he spoke. She's getting closer, he said without looking at me. Where is she? Right there. He pointed toward the empty hallway. Can't you see her? She's standing by the stairs, just watching. I looked where he was pointing and saw nothing but shadows. But the temperature in that spot had to be below freezing, because frost was forming on the wall in the shape of a woman. What is she doing? Nothing, just looking at me. But I can feel the cold coming off her, like standing next to an open freezer. And her eyes... He shuddered. Her eyes are like looking into a January sky. We sat together until dawn. I held his frail, cold hand, listening to him whispering apologies to the empty air while I watched frost patterns spread across surfaces that should have been warm. When the sun came up, he seemed to relax slightly, but I knew the relief was temporary. That evening, our house felt like an oven. The air conditioner sat silent while the July heat pushed the indoor temperature well into the 90s. Every fan in the house ran at full speed, but they couldn't compete with the supernatural winter that followed my grandfather from room to room. The whispers started earlier than usual, just after sunset. This time they weren't random phrases, but something more focused, more demanding. I couldn't make out all the words, but Grandpa could. He sat in his chair, no longer pretending he couldn't hear her. I know, he said to the empty room, his voice steady for the first time in days. I remember leaving you there. A pause, as if he were listening to something I couldn't quite catch. Yes, you called my name. You begged me to help. Another pause, longer this time. The frost was spreading faster now, covering the walls around his chair in intricate ice patterns. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Mary. But you have to understand what you did to those people. The temperature plummeted. My breath came out in thick clouds, and ice began forming on the inside of windows. No, Grandpa said, shaking his head. Sorry isn't enough. I know that now. The conversation continued for hours. Grandpa responded to accusations I could only partially hear, accepting blame for a decision that had haunted him for 27 years. Sometimes I caught fragments of her voice on the wind. Left me to die. So cold. Near midnight, his voice changed, became resigned. Yes, you were alone. You died alone because of me, and that was cruel. Maybe as cruel as anything you ever did. I deserve this. But please, leave my family alone. They don't know what I did, he said with tired, dejected voice. By 1 a.m, the house felt like a walk-in freezer despite the roaring furnace. Ice covered every surface I could see, turning our home into a winter landscape. The whispers had stopped, replaced by something worse. The sound of someone breathing slowly in the darkness, each exhalation bringing more cold. Theo, he said, with all the warmth and affection he could muster. Go to bed. You can't help me. I'm ready. I'm tired, and this is nothing you or anyone should ever have to see. I went to bed knowing I'd never see my grandfather alive again, but unable to do anything except watch it happen. Mary had finally gotten her revenge, and she'd made sure my grandfather experienced every moment of the cold that killed her. The only difference was that she died alone in the field, while he died surrounded by the warmth of family who loved him. It wasn't mercy. It was just a different kind of cruelty. 3 weeks later, I sent my college applications exclusively to schools in Florida and Arizona. Some things are too cold to forget, and I never want to feel winter again. The frost disappeared from our house the day we buried Grandpa, but sometimes on the colder nights, I still hear whispers in the wind. They're fainter now, more distant, like someone calling from very far away. I think Mary is walking again, looking for the next person who left someone to die in the cold. Story 2. The Mirror. Most of my childhood memories are fuzzy, like old photos that got left out in the sun. But this one sharp as a razor, lodged in me like a splinter that won't budge. It was the summer of '95 in a small Oklahoma town, the kind where the heat clung to your skin like damp cloth. Our house was a furnace, no air conditioning, just a rattling fan that pushed warm air around. At night, the cicadas screamed outside, and the greasy scent of hot asphalt seeped through open windows. Ricky, my best friend, lived 3 blocks over. His mom, Carla, was the town's open secret. Jars of herbs lined her shelves, candles burned to stubs, tarot cards scattered like leaves. She called it witchcraft. Others called it nonsense. I thought it was magnetic. She never hid it. Leaning into the whispers with a sly smile. That afternoon, Ricky and I roamed town to escape our stifling houses. We ended up at a garage sale, a sad sprawl of cardboard boxes and warped VHS tapes. That's where I saw it, the Mirror. It was taller than me, frame all gray and beat up. The glass was weird too. The edges looked like smoke had gotten stuck inside it. I traced my fingers along the surface. No dust, no grit, just a faint chill that didn't belong in July. $5. The old woman running the sale muttered, barely looking up. I paid, thinking Carla might use it for scrying. Her cloudy crystal ball was a dud, she'd admitted, dragging it home. Sweat soaked my shirt, the mirror heavier than it looked. I meant to take it to her, but I never did. That night, I propped it against a chair in my room, planning to haul it over tomorrow. The air smelled of dust and sweat as I sat on my bed, fanning myself with a dog-eared Sports Illustrated. I glanced at the mirror and froze. My hair wasn't mine. I'd always had pale blonde hair, so light kids called it baby blonde. In the glass, it was copper red, like rust, like dry blood. Not a trick of the lamp's yellow glow, not a sunburned tint. Red, vivid, wrong. I stood, mattress springs creaking. My reflection stayed seated, staring, heart pounding. I leaned closer. The air near the mirror was cold, like a draft from nowhere. My reflection smiled, but not like me, too wide, like it was hungry for something. I stumbled back, knees hitting the bed. The reflection tilted its head, watching me like a coyote sizing up prey. My neck prickled, sweat turning icy. I grabbed a blanket and threw it over the mirror, heart hammering as I crawled under my sheets. That was the first night. The next morning, the blanket was folded neatly on the chair. The mirror stood uncovered, glass gleaming. I checked my hair in the bathroom mirror, still blonde. Thank God. But when I returned, the reflection's hair was red again, and its eyes were darker, bruised like it hadn't slept in years. I told myself it was the heat, dehydration, anything. I dragged the mirror to the garage, wedging behind old paint cans. By evening, it was back in my room, leaning against a chair. I didn't tell anyone. Not Mom, not Ricky. Who would believe a kid saying his mirror was wrong? The reflection grew bolder. Sometimes it was me, but sharper, cheekbones too pronounced, smile too wide. Other times, it showed more. One night, I woke to silence. The cicadas gone quiet. The hallway clock ticked like a hammer. In the mirror, Ricky lay at my reflection's feet, a rope tied around his neck. Lips blue, eyes glassy. His body swayed, as if freshly cut down. My reflection sat there cross-legged, tapping its knee like it was waiting for me to notice. Then it smiled like it was showing off a prize. No, I whispered, voice cracking. No, no, no. The reflection grinned wider, eyes glinting. 2 days later, Carla found Ricky hanging from a clothesline pole in their backyard. The cops called an accident. I knew better. The mirror had shown me. Looking back, I should have told someone, but who the hell would believe me? That morning, dirt caked my sneakers, the same red clay as Ricky's yard. My palms ached, faint rope burn circling them. I scrubbed until my skin bled. I went to Carla, desperate. Her house smelled of sage and wax, her eyes swollen from crying. Did Ricky ever say anything about a mirror? I asked. She shook her head. Then her gaze lingered on me. Chris, your hair. It looks darker. I touched my scalp, heart dropping. In her bathroom mirror, my blonde was intact, but at the roots, the color bled red. I laughed it off, muttered something about lighting, and fled. The visions came faster. In the mirror, I saw Carla, skin burned up, smoke rolling through the room. She wasn't moving. My uncle crushed beneath his own truck, blood pooling in the dirt. I'd wake with ash under my nails, the stink of smoke on my shirt, or grease stain in my hands, motor oil under my fingernails. A week later, Carla's house burned. Days after that, my uncle's truck rolled over him. Both times, the mirror showed me first. I tried smashing it, took Dad's hammer, swung until sparks flew. The hammerhead cracked. The mirror didn't. I tied myself to the bed at night. In the mornings, the knots were undone, my clothes filthy with ash or dirt. A neighbor told police they'd seen me wandering near Ricky's yard. I swore I hadn't. My mother stirred soup one evening, giving me that look only moms have. You're not yourself lately, Chris. Her voice was soft, but it made me want to scream. I stared at her hands, steady on the spoon. In the mirror that night, those same hands were slick with blood. I dug into the mirror's past. The library's microfilm turned up a clipping, a 1920s cult. Members vanishing after rituals with a cursed glass. The photo showed my mirror, framed carved with symbols that seemed to shift if I stared too long. Careful with old stories, kid, the librarian said. 2 days later, her obituary ran. Heart attack, they said. The mirror had shown me her first, clutching her chest while my reflection laughed. I stopped eating. Food rotted on my plate. I scratched my arms raw. My nose bled constantly, sheets stained, rusty brown. The hum of the mirror grew louder, like a tuning fork inside my skull. My hair was fully copper red now. My eyes, dark as coal. My skin, pale as bone. My reflection no longer smiled. It stared, patient, waiting. The night came when the whole world went still. No cicadas, no wind, just the mirror humming. The glass showed Mom in the kitchen, nightgown soaked red, throat carved open like a second smile. My reflection stood behind her, knife dripping onto the tile. I locked my door, tied myself tight. But when I woke, I was in the kitchen, knife in hand, Mom's body sprawled at my feet, exactly as I'd seen. I don't remember leaving my room. Sirens wailed. The neighbor had called about screams. Police burst in, guns drawn. "Drop it, Chris." I dropped the knife, gagging, but when I looked in the cruiser's window, it wasn't me staring back. It was a red-haired thing, smiling, while my real face pounded on the glass on the other side. They call it a psychotic break, now that I really think about it. Maybe I'm glad I didn't tell anyone. They put me in here after that, a place for people who lose touch with reality. The halls reek of bleach, the walls too white. They've taken away all my reflective surfaces, but I still catch glimpses in a spoon or a window pane. Always the red hair, always the smile. Last week, I heard the mirror was sold at an evidence auction. Someone's got it now, leaning against a chair in some new bedroom. Whoever bought that mirror, they'll see me, and just maybe, they'll be dumb enough to let me out. Story 3. The silent hitchhiker I pick up every week takes all my anxiety away. I just found out where he's been putting it. My world is small. It's composed of 4 walls in my tiny, rented apartment. The soul-crushing beige cubicle where I worked, and the worn-out vinyl seats of my late father's car. The car is the only thing he ever gave me that felt like a gift instead of a burden. It's a heavy, old boat of a thing, a relic from an era I never knew, and most nights, it's my sanctuary. You see, I have this pressure, a constant, low-frequency hum of dread that lives behind my eyes. It's a cocktail of financial anxiety, social awkwardness, and the crushing existential weight of life that feels like it's being lived on a treadmill set to a slow, grinding pace. Some nights, the pressure gets so bad, I feel like my skull is going to crack. So I drive. I drive down a long, lonely stretch of state highway that cuts through the darkness between towns. It's a road to nowhere, really. Just 2 lanes of cracked asphalt flanked by endless, silent fields and the occasional skeletal tree. It's out there in the deep velvet black of the night that I do something I know is stupid. I pick up hitchhikers. I know the risks. I've seen the news reports, heard the horror stories. But the truth is, I'm lonely in the quiet, contained intimacy of sharing a small space with a stranger for a few miles. It helps. It's a brief, fleeting connection in a life that is none. A way to feel like I'm not the only person awake in the world. The first few were normal. A young soldier on a weekend leave. His uniform crisp, his stories of basic training both boring and fascinating. A college kid with a beat-up guitar case. Heading home for the holidays. They'd talk. I'd listen. And for a little while, the pressure in my head would ease, replaced by their stories. Then, one night, I picked him up. He was just standing on the shoulder of the road, a tall, thin silhouette against the faint glow of the moon. He wasn't thumbing a ride. He was just standing there, waiting. I pulled over, my gut telling me to keep going, but my loneliness and boredom won out. He opened the back door and slid in without a word. He was off. His clothes were simple, dark trousers, a button-down shirt, but they were cut in a style that was vaguely out of date, like something from photographed from 30 or 40 years ago. He was unnaturally still, his hands resting on his knees, his posture rigid. He didn't speak. He just stared straight ahead and, with one long, pale finger pointed down the road. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Sure thing," I mumbled and pulled back onto the highway. We drove in total, unnerving silence. The usual classic rock station on my old AM radio seemed to have faded to pure, hissing static the moment he got in. The silence in the car was so absolute it felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing in on me. I kept glancing at him in the rear view mirror. He never moved. He didn't even seem to be breathing. Miles crawled by, the knot of anxiety in my stomach, the pressure behind my eyes. It was a screaming, frantic thing now. The enclosed space of the car felt like a coffin. I was about to pull over, to tell him to get out, when he slowly, deliberately, lifted his hand and tapped twice on the passenger side window. We were in the middle of nowhere. No lights, no houses, no crossroads. Just the empty road and the dark fields. I pulled over. He got out as silently as he had gotten in, closed the door with a soft click, and stood on the shoulder of the road as I sped away. I didn't look back. And then it happened. It was like a switch was flipped. A dam inside me broke. An incredible, inexplicable wave of pure, blissful relief washed over me. The crushing pressure in my head didn't just ease. It vanished. Completely. The knot of glass in my stomach dissolved into warm, liquid peace. The static on the radio suddenly cleared, and a song I loved came on, sounding crisper and more vibrant than I had ever heard it. The air in the car, which had felt stale and suffocating, now tasted clean and sweet. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The first truly deep breath I felt I had taken in years. The dread of my job, the fear of the bills, the constant, grinding anxiety, it was all gone. I was light. I was happy. I spent the rest of the night driving with the windows down, singing along to the radio, feeling a joy so profound it was almost a religious experience. The feeling lasted for 2 glorious days. I was a different person. I was confident at work. I made jokes with my co-workers. I slept a deep, dreamless, perfect sleep. But by the 3rd day, the pressure started to seep back in, a slow, creeping tide of the old dread. I knew what I had to do. I had to find him again. That night, I drove back out to that lonely stretch of road. I drove for an hour, a desperate hope warring with the fear that it had just been a fluke, a bizarre, one-time psychological event. And then I saw him, standing on the shoulder, in the exact same spot, as still and silent as a statue. My heart leaped. I pulled over. He got in. The same unnerving silence. The same empty miles. The same 2 taps on the window. And the same glorious, euphoric, soul-cleansing release the moment he was gone. It became my therapy. My addiction. Once a week, every Tuesday night, I would make my pilgrimage. I would drive out to the road, and he would always be there. I would pour all of my accumulated stress, anxiety, and sadness into the silence, and he would take it. He would carry away into the darkness, leaving me clean, light, and free. My life transformed. With the anxiety gone, I was able to function. I got a small promotion at work. I started talking to people, making tentative friendships. For the first time, I felt like I was actually living, not just surviving, all for the price of a few gallons of gas and a silent, weekly ride with a ghost. But after a few months, the effects started to diminish. The high wasn't as high. The relief wasn't as absolute. The feeling of peace would only last a day, then half a day. The passenger was still taking something, but it felt like he was only taking the top layer, leaving the deeper, older anxieties untouched. I needed more. I needed a stronger dose. And if he only fed on my negative emotions, I realized with chilling addict's logic that I would have given more to eat. I started to cultivate my own misery. I began to farm my own dread. I started small. I deliberately missed a bill payment, just so I could spend a few days with the cold dread of a late fee notice hanging over my head. I'd take on extra, impossible deadlines at work, knowing I would have worked myself to bone, just to feel that raw, frantic stress. And it worked. The more miserable I was during the week, the more powerful the release was on Tuesday night. The high was back, better than ever. So I pushed it further. I started picking fights with my boss over trivial things, reveling in the hot, angry surge of adrenaline and the subsequent days of walking on eggshells. I started borrowing money I didn't need, just to feel the crushing weight of the debt. I was a self-destructive artist, and my medium was my own life. I was tearing it apart, piece by piece, just to have a stronger negative emotion to feed the silent man in my car, so I could feel a few hours of peace. It was a vicious, insane cycle, and I was completely, hopelessly trapped within it. The accident happened 3 weeks ago. It wasn't even his fault, not directly. It was mine. I was driving home from a deliberately terrible day at work, a day where I had accidentally deleted a crucial file, incurring the full, screaming wrath of my supervisor. I was buzzing with a potent cocktail of shame and anxiety, already looking forward to my ride the next night. I was distracted. I ran a red light. It wasn't a bad crash. The other driver was fine. My old car was crumpled but fixable. My only injury was a clean break in my left tibia, a broken leg. At the hospital, as I was lying in the ER, a doctor came in with my x-rays. He put them up on the light box. Well, The good news is it's a simple fracture, he said, pointing with a pen. 6 to 8 weeks in a cast, and you should be good as new. He paused, his brow furrowed. He tapped a spot on the x-ray, a little higher up on my tibia, away from the break. But what is this? I looked. There, on the image of my bone, was a strange, dark, spiderweb-like growth. It was a shadow on the film, a patch of darkness that didn't belong. It looks like some kind of lesion, the doctor said, his voice now a low, clinical murmur. A tumor, maybe. We need to run some more tests. The next week was a blur of scans, needles, and quiet, worried conversations in hospital hallways that I wasn't supposed to hear. Finally, the doctor sat me down in a small, sterile office. He had a file in his hands and a look on his face that I knew was not good news. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, he said, his voice gentle but firm. The growths, they're not just in your leg. They've spread. They're in your lungs, your liver, your spine. It's a very, very aggressive form of cancer. And the strangest part is we can find no record of it in your previous medical files. It's as if these tumors, already at a late stage, have appeared out of thin air in just the last few weeks. I just stared at him, my mind a roar of white noise. He kept talking, using words like prognosis and palliative care and making arrangements. But I wasn't listening. I was thinking about my silent passenger. I was thinking about the weekly ritual. I was thinking about all that pain, all that anxiety, all that dread I had fed him. It hadn't just vanished. It had to go somewhere. Did he convert them somehow? He had taken my mental anguish and transformed it, giving it back to me in a new, physical, and utterly malignant form. The tumors were my anxiety. They were my dread. They were the physical manifestation of all the poison I had willingly cultivated and then handed over. The doctor's final words cut through the haze. There are some treatment options we can try. But to be frank, I've never seen anything progress this quickly. I can't predict what will happen. But I knew what would happen. The doctor had said it was too late. There was no cure for this. And in that moment of absolute, soul-crushing certainty, a strange, quiet calm settled over me. I'm dying. That is a fact. And with that fact comes a whole new world of fear. The fear of pain. The fear of the unknown. The fear of leaving nothing behind. It's a vast, crushing, ultimate anxiety. The strongest dose I've ever had. And I know exactly what to do with it. I checked myself out of the hospital this morning. My leg is in a cast, but I can drive. My old, battered car is waiting for me. And tonight is Tuesday. I'm writing this as my final goodbye, and as a warning, be careful what you wish for. Be careful of the easy solutions, the silent helpers who offer to take your burdens away. It's better to carry your own pain. It's better to face your own dread, because the things that offer to take it from you are not your friends. They're just looking for a new place to put it. I'm not afraid anymore. That's the strange part. My decision is made. The doctor said my time is short. So why should I spend it in terror? Why not spend it in that clean, pure, blissful peace, even if it's just for a day or two? It's time to go now. My car is waiting. The lonely road is calling. And I know with an absolute certainty that he'll be out there, standing on the shoulder, waiting for me. And I have one last beautiful, terrible gift to give him. One final ride. Story 4. I do maintenance work at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Never come here at night. If you don't know, Chernobyl was a nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union, now Ukraine, in the 1980s. Reactor 4 of the plant exploded at 1:23 a.m. on the 26th of April, 1986. It is the worst nuclear disaster in history. It remains radioactive till date and will continue to be so until the next 10,000 years. I've been doing maintenance work at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant for 6 years now. Day shifts mostly. Stuff like routine checks, equipment repairs, monitoring containment structures. It's quiet work, and the pay is decent enough to keep me coming back. The zone has become as familiar to me as my own apartment in Kiev. But 3 weeks ago, They asked me to cover some night shifts. Budget cuts, they said. Fewer crews, longer hours. I needed the overtime pay. Prices have skyrocketed since the war began. So I said yes. I should have said no. The first thing you notice about Chernobyl at night isn't the silence. It's how wrong the sounds are. During the day, you hear what you'd expect. Wind through broken windows, metal creaking as temperatures change, the distant hum of monitoring equipment. Normal sounds for a dead place. At night, the animals come out, and they're different. The first time I saw a wolf walking upright, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was standing maybe 50 meters away, perfectly balanced on its hind legs like a person, just watching me through the fence. When I turned my flashlight on it, the reflection from its eyes wasn't the usual yellow-green. They glowed blue, like the color you see in those old photos of reactor cores. I blinked and it was gone. The next night, I saw 3 of them, walking in single file along the main road, upright, arms swaying at their sides like they were heading to work. I radioed it in, but dispatch just told me to stay inside the buildings and continue my rounds. The birds were worse. I watched a flock of ravens pass over Reactor 3, only to begin flying in perfect circles over it. 25 birds, perfectly spaced, all flying the same circular pattern. They flew like that for exactly 11 minutes. I timed it, then they flew away in complete silence. But it was the deer that made me stop sleeping between shifts. I was checking the coolant systems in Building 2 when I heard hoofbeats on concrete, slow, deliberate, like footsteps. I looked out the window and saw a stag walking upright down the corridor of the administrative building across the courtyard. It was carrying something in its mouth. Looked like papers or documents. It walked it in the hall, set whatever it was carrying on a desk, then walked back the way it came. Still upright, still wrong. I started bringing a camera, but the pictures never came out right. Just blurry shapes and that same blue glow where eyes should be. Last night was my final shift. I know that now. I was doing routine checks on the monitoring equipment when I heard it. A scream from the direction of Reactor 4. Not an animal sound. Human. Desperate and terrified, like someone was dying. I grabbed my radio. Dispatch, this is Volkov. I'm hearing distress calls from Reactor 4. Are there any other crews on site? Static. Then, negative, Volkov. You're the only one scheduled tonight. The scream came again. It was closer this time. I should have stayed put. I should have waited for backup. But that scream, it sounded like someone who needed help right now. I made my way toward Reactor 4, following the sound. My dosimeter was clicking steadily. Normal background radiation for this area. The scream had stopped, but now I could hear something else. Laughter. It was coming from below, from the basement level where they keep the elephant's foot sealed away. The elephant's foot is the most radioactive mass on Earth. It is an amalgamation of molten uranium, concrete, and debris. In the 1990s, if you stood there for even 5 minutes, the radiation would kill you. It has been locked ever since. The room is always locked, and I'm the only maintenance worker with a key, which I've never used. Orders are to report any issues with that door immediately and wait for specialists. But as I got closer, I could see light spilling out from under the door. Dim blue light. The door was slightly open. I checked my keyring. The key was still there. I was the only one who could have opened that door, and I sure as hell hadn't been down here tonight. The laughter was definitely coming from inside. Soft, almost childlike, like someone had heard a funny joke, but were trying to hold their laugh in. I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out, call for help, let someone else handle this. But my feet kept moving forward. I had to know. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The elephant's foot was glowing, not the dull, dark mass I'd seen in training photos. This was bright, pulsing with that same blue light I'd been seeing in the animal's eyes. It looked fresh, hot, like it had just formed yesterday. My dosimeter started clicking faster, then faster. Within seconds, it was a solid, high-pitched whine. That meant I was taking lethal doses of radiation. What the hell? I whispered. That's when I heard the door slam shut behind me. I spun around and tried the handle. Locked. I fumbled for my key, but when I tried to insert it, it wouldn't fit, like the lock had changed. I'm trapped in here with that thing. My dosimeter is screaming. I can already feel my skin starting to burn. I'm typing this on my phone. I don't know why. Maybe I just need someone to know what happened. Maybe I need to warn people. My hands are shaking. Hard to type. The skin on my knuckles is starting to blister and peel. The elephant's foot is getting brighter. I swear I can see shapes in the glow. Faces. They're all looking at me and smiling. The laughter started again. It's not coming from the mass. It's coming from the walls. The ceiling. Everywhere. I just looked at my watch. It says 1:23 a.m. The date says April 26, 1986. The glow is getting brighter. I think I understand now. I think I'm not the first maintenance worker to find this room open. I can hear footsteps in the hallway outside. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. My watch is running backwards now. If you're reading this, don't come looking for me. And whatever you do, never work the night shift in the zone. Some doors should stay locked. The footsteps have stopped right outside. Someone's trying to handle. A deafening explosion shook the floor above me. 1:22 a.m. April 26, 1986. The reactor has exploded. I think I need to get back to work. Story 5. Mr. Machine. There was this TV show I used to watch called Mr. Machine. It aired on a local station that mostly consisted of boring adult shows and news. So my young self always liked when it played. My family lived in a small rural town that had little to no media cess. Those were different times. I'm old now, much too old to be posting online, I guess, and still can't really fathom how quickly technology improved over the years. When my nephew showed me the internet for the first time, I was amazed. Confused, yes, but amazed nonetheless. I could look up everything that I was always curious about. All the world's secrets seemed to open and reveal themselves before me. I could see my old town again. A decayed, silent, and empty place once thriving with life. Ghost Town read one website's description. Top 15 creepiest abandoned places in the U.S. Read another article featuring a photo of an old barn that I used to play in with other kids. It's funny to me how the past seems to creep people out nowadays. Soon enough, after my nephew explained to me how downloading torrents worked, I managed to obtain a big collection of all my favorite shows from the past. There was only one that I couldn't find, Mr. Machine. I searched far and wide, almost getting my PC infested with a virus in process, but I still couldn't find even a short clip or a single frame from the show. But I remembered it very vividly. The titular host of the show, Mr. Machine, was a jolly magician wearing a black top hat, a red cape with a pattern of blue stars and crescent moons, a white suit, purple tie, and checkered black and white pants. Every episode revolved around him helping some kids with any trouble and problems they encountered. He carried a red box he would call his machine, and always used it to make something appear, disappear, change size, etc. A typical kids show. Each episode contained some sort of a moralizing message. I still really wanted to see it. So I made an account on a forum dedicated to finding old, obscure, and local shows and posted my request there. In about 2 hours, someone responded. They were going by the nickname of GarageBox44. This GarageBox fellow sent me a download link with the following message attached. Hi, I'm sending you the 4 episodes I managed to tape off TV back in the day. I guess we both lived in the same area. Yeah, very obscure, very weird. Just see it for yourself, man. I never want to see it again. I guess you will have the same reaction as I did. LOL. Cheers. Weird. What was supposed to be so very weird about it? I didn't remember anything unnerving to be in that show, and yet this guy certainly seemed to be reacting weirdly to it. After downloading the archive, I was greeted with 4 MP4 files, each titled Machine 1, and so on. Each file seemed to lack any thumbnail, even though they were video files. I know nothing of it, and anxious to hear that familiar theme song again, played the first one. The footage was blurry, evidently ripped off of a worn-out VHS tape, but still clear enough to present the titular Mr. Machine in all his whimsical glory. There was no intro, however, but I thought that maybe the other episodes have it. And so, I leaned back in my chair and watched on, with a satisfied and amused grin on my face. Mr. Machine, there's something wrong with my kitty cat, yelped out a small boy as he ran up to Mr. Machine and pulled his cape. Please, will you help him? Of course, little Tommy, was the enthusiastic response. Soon, after arriving at the little boy's home, the magician pulled out his machine and asked the boy to show him his kitty. Gee, I didn't know, Mr. Machine. He is in a really bad shape. Oh, come on now, Tommy. There is nothing my machine wouldn't fix in an instant. Remember, magic does wonders. The boy reluctantly opened the door to his room. I noticed that something was off as soon as they both arrived at that place. The house was a real one. It wasn't cheap set, and I could see how shoddy and old it was. The paint was coming off the wall in a few places, and the furniture looked ancient. I thought that maybe they couldn't afford a better location due to the small budget, but my worries increased as the camera focused on the cat. It wasn't an ordinary house cat, not even an animal. It was a man wearing an anthropomorphic cat costume, a very badly made cat costume. Its plastic eyes were bulging out expressionless as the magician came up to it. What's wrong with you, my little kitty? He asked. The cat wasn't little at all. In fact, I think that the actor inside was taller than Mr. Machine. Meow, he yelped. I'm very cold. I think I'm sick, Mr. Machine. Meow. There was something about his voice that made me very uneasy. I don't know how to describe it, but it sounded forced and unpleasant. Don't worry, my little feline friend. My machine knows how to make medicine. Look and see. With that jolly cry, the machine moved about and opened its lid, revealing a small bottle filled with pills inside. After taking it out of the machine, the magician produced one of the small pills and gave it to the cat. After pretending to swallow the pill, the actor in the costume rubbed his furry belly and expressed his relief. Remember, kids, said Mr. Machine, turning to face the camera. Cats and other pets must be taken care of, if your kitty or doggy seems. The footage abruptly stopped there, leaving a black screen for about a minute before the entire video file stopped playing. Weird. I thought, must be a very early episode. I didn't remember it being so shoddy. With some weird mixture of anxiety, disappointment, and curiosity, I played the second file. The second episode was different and was way more professional looking. This time, Mr. Machine's theme song played in full, making me feel that feeling of nostalgic happiness that I didn't watch in the first episode. When it finished, the show proper began. Mr. Machine was helping some kids with their homework and gave a rather cheesy short speech on learning and being a good student at school. One of the kids was strangely familiar to me, but I brushed it off as my memory getting bad due to my old age. Another scene followed. Two boys sat at a table arguing over a borrowed comic book, while Mr. Machine put his box between them. The magician tapped the lid, and the machine produced a miniature stage where a puppet cat and a small comic book appeared. The puppet cat was shoved by a little faceless wooden figure that came suddenly out of the bottom of the stage, tumbled, and the comic was burned in slow, paper cutout flames while a cheesy, sad song played in the background. The whole puppet show seemed very confusing to me, and I wonder how could any small kid even begin to understand its message. I remembered having a similar conflict with one of my friends back in the day. One way or another, we got into a heated argument, something to do with my comic book collection that I was very proud of. And then, something happened. When I tried to remember more, I was taken aback by how suddenly Mr. Machine came up to the camera. His eyes seemed very focused, tense even. Mr. Machine wagged a finger and lectured about respect and temper, about how small cruelties grow if you don't stop them. I watched the scene, and my stomach dropped as the taller boy in the sketch reminded me of someone. The large ears, the same crooked front teeth when he laughed, the exact cowlick he always complained about. Jacob? I thought, Jacob, oh my God. I remember now. I blurted out loud. Jacob was the kid I used to be friends with. We both met almost every day and were best buddies. We watched Mr. Machine together and always played pretending to have our own magical machines. We were so close together, almost like brothers. I could now remember that warm feeling of fun we both shared. He had this cute little cat we loved to play with. I sighed as I recollected how happy we both were when it meowed running around the yard. Now, I remembered how that friendship suddenly disappeared from my life. I couldn't remember exactly how it started, but we both began to hate each other over that year. Oh, right. I thought it was Jacob who didn't want to give back my comic book that one time. I couldn't believe just how similar the actor playing with the kids was similar to him. It was so eerie. The cat in this episode and the one before, that also made me think of him. The episode ended normally and I stared at the screen worried. I decided to continue watching as I hoped to regain some more lost memories. The third episode was winter themed and its main lesson was about safety during the winter break. Now, kids, look out, Mr. Machine exclaimed. Water is dangerous enough on its own, but especially during winter. You can get very cold if you fall into it. Something about that sentence and how Mr. Machine pronounced it made my heart start up. What? I mumbled to myself. Cold water, what was it? On the screen, the show cut to a staged dramatization. A frozen pond with thin, cracked sheen of ice and a shaggy cat puppet. Two children teased the poor cat until one of them pushed it. The puppet teetered, slid, and plunged through a jagged hole into black water where it bobbed and disappeared. Mr. Machine knelt, solemn, and spoke about consequences, how a careless shove can mean life or death. The scene was clumsy and theatrical, but it unlocked something inside me like a picture of a real cold river came rushing back and smacked me in the face. I now remembered why I stopped talking to Jacob after that winter break. All the bad memories were terrible enough, but then something about Jacob's cat made me cringe with discomfort. I didn't remember the details, only that after I got so angry at him, his pet cat was running around the snow trying to play with me. I remembered the burning anger as I saw it. I was so devastated by all the emotions now flooding in. I dreaded to play the final file. After much thinking, I decided to get it over with and clicked on my machine for the final episode. Episode, right? I wasn't even an episode. It was just Mr. Machine's head and upper body on a black background looking at the camera. His face emotionless and cold. Almost sculpted and unreal, but still distinctively alive, fleshy and moving ever so slightly. Hello there. Here he said my full name. I jumped up in my seat and screamed out loud. I wanted to move, but fear made me still as a rock. No use of screaming now. He continued, all the kids that did something very bad have to pay for it eventually, don't they? He tilted his head, looking right at me. He followed my gaze and movements. I thought I was going insane. No. How? I mumbled. So, he responded, clasping his hands. You really don't understand the lessons I've showed you just now? You are a really slow learner. Mrs. Kowalski was right about you being a stupid little brat after all. Mrs. Kowalski, I mumbled. She was my elementary school teacher. Somehow, he knew all about my life in all details of it. He knew my grades, my favorite singers, the date of my wedding, the date I've lost my virginity, and every other significant moment of my long life. He looked at me like a demon, like an ever-knowing deity, judging. Now, let's go back to that cold winter of 1964, shall we? I looked on with dread as images of me and Jacob flashed on the screen. We both were fighting, both hated each other after all those years of friendship. I didn't even try to rationalize it anymore. I just sat and watched. The footage dissolved into a shaky home movie style clip, grainy handheld, the kind of old film stock that made human faces look like ghosts. There I was, smaller, meaner, cheeks raw from cold and anger, hands clasped tightly into fists. Jacob stood opposite me, eyes wide, hands held out in pure fear. Beside us was a cold, deep, dark river. Suddenly, Jacob's cry filled the speakers and my throat bruised with a memory. I remembered how much I hated him when, to make me even more angry, he burned my precious small collection of comic books in the kitchen stove. I remembered how I wanted to hurt him so much. Then, the final flash of memory, winter. Final days of winter break in me, deranged with hate and malice, taking his beloved kitty and throwing into the river to drown. TSK, you were so ruthless for such a small kid. whispered Mr. Machine, his voice resonating inside of my head and reverberating with all severity. Guts turned inside my body as I realized what he was talking about. As unbelievable as it was, Mr. Machine was speaking to me. "Isn't that what you did?" he asked, still looking straight at me, piercing me with pure condescending hate. "You killed Jacob Stanley's cat, didn't you?" I was breathing heavily and sweating like a madman. I remembered it now. All the fights we both had, all the bruises that he gave me and that I gave him, all the malice in his eyes as he burned my comic books. I remembered it. The look of fear in the eyes of that kitty as I plunged into the cold waters that terrible winter all those years ago. I remembered it all now. I sunk back into my chair weeping and pleading Mr. Machine to spare me. I cried like a little child again, and again felt like a helpless little kid. The feeling of guilt and all the returning memories came flooding back, and my heart hurt badly. "You like cold water, boy?" he asked, with a horrible grin on his face. "My machine will make you feel like that poor kitty you destroyed." He opened the machine's lid and revealed a torrent of icy waters. I screamed out loud as I moved toward the bathroom door against my own will. I watched as my hands turned the cold water on, and as the bathtub filled up to the brim, I watched as I jumped right into it and begun sinking, deep cold, deep underwater, as the lights faded away and the cold overtook me. Story 6. We found a doll on the side of the road, and then my daughter started getting very, very sick. The sickness started when we got the doll. Ellie had always been the picture of health. Energetic, bright, a total chatterbox. That's probably why I noticed the symptoms so early. And it started when we picked up the doll. The next day was garbage day, so a few houses had some trash piled at the curb. An old chair, a used mattress. But one place was getting rid of a few kid items. A little car you sit in and push like a stroller, and a doll. The doll was plastic and about 2 feet tall and looked similar to one of those vintage Shirley Temple dolls. She had curly blonde hair that took on a sort of grayish, musty color due to age. Her eyelashes were long and she was grinning, showing off little square teeth. She was wearing an elaborate lacy peach-colored dress. Mom, are they throwing out that doll?" Ellie asked. "Yeah, I guess so. I want it. Can we get it? Please." I slowed the car down. I hated taking stuff off the curb like that, because obviously it was being thrown out for a reason. What if it was covered in black mold? What if it was sitting in the back of an attic for decades, with mice and bats and all sorts of nasties? What if it was haunted, like that weird Annabelle doll everyone's always talking about? But that fear was quickly squelched as Ellie started crying. I know. Don't reinforce bad behavior. Don't give in to tantrums. That's nice in theory. But when you had a miserable day at work and feel a migraine coming on, you really don't give a fuck about what all those parenting books say. I pulled over, got out of the car, and grabbed the doll. "You can't play with it until I wash it," I told her. "Okay," she sniffled. That night, after I'd wiped the doll down with some baby wipes, Ellie was on cloud 9. I heard her whispering to the doll as she tucked it in. She'd named it Lila to go with her other favorite doll, who she'd named Lily. "I love you, Lila. I can't wait for tomorrow, Lila. Good night, Lila. Sweet dreams." When I checked on Ellie after she'd fallen asleep, I found Lila tucked into the little doll bed she used to put Lily in. The little floral bedspread was tucked neatly under her. Her eyes had been shuttered closed. I paused. I didn't think the doll's eyelids. I shook my head, smiled at Ellie's angelic little face, lost in dreamland. Then I closed the door and walked back down the hallway. Ellie took that doll everywhere. I thought about all the germs and filth that probably live in the folds of her lacy little frock. I wish I could throw her in the washing machine, but I could already picture it. Lila's little face all melted, eyes drooping and jiggly like balls of jello, and Ellie screaming, and screaming, and screaming. I couldn't figure out why she liked Lila so much. Even Lily, who we'd had for a few years at this point, looked new out of the box compared to this ragged thing. Her hair was tangled in a snarl. Her dress was stained and musty smelling, and her eyes were a creepy reddish hue. This is apparently a real thing that happens with old dolls. Some sort of chemical reaction that turns their eyes red. It's super creepy, the thing. But she loved it. She even started bringing Lila into bed with her instead of Lily. That made my stomach turn. Thinking of her breathing and all the germs and mold all night. I tried to search for the same model of doll online. I even took a photo and uploaded it to AI. All I got were old, red-eyed Shirley Temple dolls. But this wasn't a Shirley Temple doll. Her face was too long, her eyes were too big. And then Ellie started getting sick. It first happened about a week after we got the doll. I woke up with a start in the middle of the night. Ellie was crying. I could hear her wails through the door. "What's wrong?" "It hurts," she wailed. "What? What hurts? What happened?" "My tummy," she said. "Oh, sweetheart, it's going to be..." She interrupted me with a stream of vomit. Oh, geez. I felt her forehead. Warm. It was that time of year. Sigh. I spent half the night up with her. But that was the problem. The sickness didn't really go away. Even a week later, Ellie was still complaining of nausea every few days. She threw up a few times a week. Maybe she's getting food allergies. My sister told me on the phone. You can get her tested. One night, Ellie woke me up at 2 a.m. I sat up to see her standing in the doorway. "Mommy, I threw up," she said weakly. "Oh, sweetheart." I hugged her and got her cleaned up. I figured she'd want to sleep in my bed, but she seemed to be feeling well enough to go back to hers. I walked her back to her bedroom. I stopped dead in the doorway. Lila was sitting up in the middle of the bed, perfectly posed, not the way a messy 7-year-old would leave her. She was sitting up straight, hands in her lap, her creepy reddish eyes locked on me, and she looked like she was smiling. After Ellie fell asleep, as I was tossing and turning halfway asleep, I realized none of this started until the doll. I marched back to her room, took the doll, and shoved her into the closet. I bet some virus in there, some germ she keeps breathing in, or some mold or something. I felt like a terrible mother, letting her play with that thing, letting her sleep with it, breathing it in all night. When I woke up, Ellie was still asleep, and Lila was tucked in next to her, red eyes shuttered closed. Damn it, I tried hiding in other places. My closet, the basement, the pantry. But that stupid doll always ended up back in Ellie's bed. She was always good at finding stuff. I finally made the decision to throw it out. In the middle of the night, I bagged up Lila, threw her in a trash bag, then double bagged it. I did it in the wee hours before the trash was picked up, so there was no chance Ellie would find it. No chance I'd break after she screamed and get it for her. I heard the rumble of the garbage truck around 6 a.m. I smiled and rolled over, thinking our problems were finally over. They weren't. When I went to Ellie's room, I expected to see Lila there, somehow, magically, back in her bed. But she wasn't. Ellie screamed the entire day, predictably, but she actually got over a little faster than I was expecting. At bedtime, there was a little resurgence of crying, but she fell asleep around the same time. Over the next few days, Ellie's attention went back to Lily the doll, and it seemed like she had mostly forgotten about Lila, but she didn't get better. She continued to tell me she was nauseous, continued to vomit, continued to lose weight. She looked pale and weak compared to her usual vibrant self. Getting rid of Lila hadn't changed anything. Is this some sort of curse? Or some sort of chemical thing with lasting effects? Heavy metals? Mono? We went to doctors, got blood tests. Nothing came back inclusive. I was a mess, tearing my hair out. And then, a few days later, it happened. I woke with a start in the middle of the night, to screaming. I ran into Ellie's room. The bed was empty. All the blood drained out of my face. But then I saw Ellie. She was crouched in the far corner of her room, eyes wide. She raised a finger, and then I saw the doll. Not Lila. Lily. Her braided pigtails falling over her shoulders, her brown frock fluttering over her ankles. Her usual smiling mouth was twisted upside down, Her eyebrows were furrowed, and her stubby little arms were extended, groping the air for Ellie. I ran over to Ellie, grabbed her, and ran out of the room. "She's jealous." Ellie cried into my shoulder as we barricaded ourselves in my bedroom. Jealous of Lila, so she made a curse on me. In the morning, Lily was lying motionless on the floor like a doll would. I grabbed a knife and hacked her pieces like any sane person would do. Then I put different parts of her in different garbage bags and dumped them at different locations, like I was disposing of a body. I sound crazy. I know I do, but it was all worth it, because Ellie made a full recovery. Story 7. A company sent me a cure for my father's grief. When the bottle ran out, their final automated message told me to kill him. My life has been on hold for a year. A year ago, I was supposed to be moving out, starting my own life. I had an apartment lined up, a job waiting. Then my mother died, and my world, along with my father's, simply stopped. She was a sun in the sky. They were one of those couples you see in old movies, completely, utterly devoted to each other. When she died, suddenly from an aneurysm, the light just went out of him. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing, heavy blanket that smothered our entire house. At first, it was what you'd expect. Crying, a refusal to talk about her, or an inability to talk about anything else. He stopped going to work. He stopped seeing his friends. I made the decision to stay. I couldn't leave him like that. He was my dad. I put my own life on pause, telling myself it would just be for a few months, until he got back on his feet. But he never did. The grief didn't lessen. It metastasized. It started with him not eating. He just pushed the food around his plate. Then he stopped getting out of bed. The vibrant, strong man who had taught me how to ride a bike and build a bookshelf was replaced by a hollow-eyed ghost who just laid there, staring at the ceiling, wasting away. We went to doctors. So many doctors. They ran every test imaginable. Physically, they said he was fine. There was nothing wrong with him. It's psychological, one of them told me, with a detached, clinical sympathy. Severe, prolonged grief reaction. He needs therapy, maybe medication. We tried that. The therapist would come to the house, and my dad would just stare at them, his eyes empty, refusing to speak a single word. He wouldn't take the pills. He was just giving up. He was letting himself die, following her into the dark. It's been a year now. He's a skeleton, a fragile collection of bones under a thin, papery skin. He gets his nutrients through an 4 drip that I learned how to set up myself. He hasn't spoken a word in 6 months. I spend my days changing his sheets, cleaning him, watching his chest rise and fall with shallow, ragged breaths, and just waiting for the end. My own life has become a ghost, a half-remembered dream of a future I was supposed to have. Then, 3 weeks ago, the phone rang. It was a private number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello. Good morning." A cheerful, professional-sounding woman's voice said, "Am I speaking with the caretaker of—" She said my father's full name. A cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. "Who is this?" I asked. "I'm calling from a private biomedical research firm," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We specialize in unique solutions for profound psychological trauma. We've been reviewing your father's medical case, and we believe we can help." I felt a surge of anger. "My father's medical case? That's confidential. How did you get that? This is illegal. I'm reporting you." "I understand your concern," she said, her tone never wavering. "And I do apologize for the unorthodox nature of this call. Our methods of data acquisition are proprietary. But please, before you hang up, just consider your father. The prognosis is not good, is it? The doctors have given up. They're just managing his decline. He's going to die. You know that. We're offering you a chance. A cure." Her words cut through my anger like a scalpel. She was right. He was dying. I was just his hospice nurse, waiting for the inevitable. "What kind of cure?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. Our treatment is based on the principle of sensory anchoring, she explained. We believe that in cases of extreme grief, the psyche becomes untethered. It needs a familiar, powerful anchor to pull it back to reality. We can create that anchor, and as our treatment is still in the final trial phase, we would be happy to provide it to you completely free of charge. Free. A cure. It sounded too good to be true. It sounded like a scam. But I looked through the doorway at the skeletal figure lying still and silent in the dim light of the bedroom, and the desperation, a feeling I've been living with for so long, won out over my skepticism. What do I have to do? It's a very simple process, the woman said. We just need a biological sample from the object of his grief. Your mother. Something she had close contact with. Something that would retain a strong, personal essence. A hairbrush is ideal. A piece of well-worn jewelry. A favorite article of clothing. It was morbid. It was ghoulish. But I was beyond caring. And what do I do with it? She gave me an address, a P.O. box in another state, and told me to mail the item there. That was it. Once we receive the sample, we can synthesize the anchor. You should receive the treatment within a week. That night, I went into my mother's closet for the first time since she died. I had kept her room exactly as she had left it, a perfect, heartbreaking time capsule. The air was thick with her scent, a faint mix of her favorite perfume, and something that was just her. I opened her jewelry box. On the top, lying on a bed of velvet, was her old, silver-backed hairbrush. I could still see a few of her long, dark hairs tangled in the bristles. My hand was shaking as I picked it up. It felt like a grave desecration. I put it in a padded envelope and mailed it the next day. A week later, a small, unmarked cardboard box arrived. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in a bed of black foam, was a single, small, elegant perfume bottle. It was made of a dark violet-colored glass with a simple silver atomizer. There was no label. Tucked alongside it was a small, folded piece of paper with a single line of instructions, printed in a clean, sterile font. Administer 1 spray into the air near the subject, once per day. That was it. I opened the bottle, my curiosity overriding my unease. I sprayed a tiny amount onto my wrist. The scent that bloomed in the air was beautiful. It was a complex floral, with notes I couldn't quite place. And underneath it, there was something else. A warmth, a softness, a scent that was so deeply, achingly familiar it made my chest tighten. It was my mother. It wasn't just her perfume. It was her. The scent of her skin after she'd been working in the garden. The faint smell of the vanilla she used in her baking. The very essence of her presence. It was all there, perfectly, impossibly recreated in this little bottle. It was a liquid memory. I went into my father's room. He was lying there, the same as always, his eyes open but seeing nothing. I held the bottle a few feet from his face, and with a trembling hand, I pressed the atomizer. A fine, fragrant mist settled in the air around him, and his eyes focused. It happened instantly. The vacant, empty stare was gone. His eyes, for the first time in a year, locked onto mine. A flicker of recognition, of confusion. He took a breath, a deep, rattling breath that was stronger than any I had heard him take in months. "Son," he whispered, his voice a dry, cracking rasp from disuse. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. I had a terrible dream," he said, his eyes scanning the room. Where's your mother?" It was the most painful question he could have asked, but it was a question. He was back. The next few weeks were a miracle, a resurrection. Every morning, I would give him a single spray of the perfume, and every day he got stronger. He started eating solid food again. He sat up. He started walking, at first with a walker, then on his own. The color returned to his face. He gained weight. The hollow-eyed ghost was gone, replaced by my father. He cried. He apologized over and over for the year I had lost, for the burden he had been. We talked. We mourned my mother together, properly for the first time. Our house, which had been a tomb, was filled with life again. I was so full of profound, grateful joy, the strange company, the ghoulish methods. It didn't matter. They had given me my father back. But as the initial euphoria faded, I started to notice the new routine that had formed. The perfume was the linchpin of his existence. He couldn't function without it. He would wake up in the morning, groggy and disoriented, his eyes holding a trace of that old vacant look. He would be listless, confused. Then I would administer the spray. The effect was immediate. His eyes would clear, his posture would straighten, and he would be himself again. It was like winding up a clockwork man every morning. He was completely, utterly dependent on it. It was an addiction, but it was a life-saving one. Or so I thought. Yesterday morning, I picked up the bottle. It felt light. I gave it a shake. It was almost empty. There was maybe 1-2 sprays left. A cold, hard-out panic formed in my stomach. I had tried calling the company's number before, just to thank them, but had always gone to a disconnected tone. I gave my dad his morning spray. I had to tell him. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The medicine, it's almost gone." The color drained from his face. The cheerful, recovered man I had been living with for the past month vanished, replaced by a stranger. His eyes went wide with a raw, animal panic. "No," he whispered. No, that can't be. I need it. I need her." "It's okay," I said, trying to soothe him. "You're better now. You're strong. You don't need it anymore." "You don't understand," he roared, his voice suddenly full of terrifying strength. He grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "I can't lose her again. I can't." He was a different person. This wasn't grief. This was a raw, desperate, violent need. A junkie's rage. He spent the rest of the day in a state of agitated, paranoid terror, pacing the house, constantly asking me if I'd found more. This morning, I gave him the last spray. He calmed down instantly, but the moment was bittersweet. I knew that in 24 hours, the monster would be back. I spent all day trying the company's number, over and over. Finally, someone picked up. It wasn't a person. It was a cold, automated, female voice. "Thank you for calling," the voice said, its tone flat and detached. "Due to a recent government investigation and a cessation of our operations, this company is now permanently closed. We are no longer able to provide our services or products." My heart sank. "No, please," I whispered the recording. "If you are a former client," the voice continued, "and your treatment supply has been depleted, we sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. We are unable to synthesize any further doses. It has been noted in our late-stage trials that discontinuing the treatment can result in acute psychological distress and unpredictable, aggressive behavior in the subject. The sensory anchor becomes a psychosomatic necessity. The subject will not recover. Their decline will be rapid and irreversible." The recording paused for a beat. "We strongly advise you to secure your own safety. If you are unable to contain the subject, our final recommendation is euthanasia. We are sorry for your loss. Have a nice day." The line went dead. I'm writing this now from my bedroom. I have the door barricaded with my dresser. My father is in the living room. Or, the thing that used to be my father is in the living room. The perfume wore off about an hour ago. I can hear him. He's destroying the place. I hear the crash of furniture, the shattering of glass, and I hear his voice screaming. He's not screaming my name. He's screaming hers. He's screaming for his wife, for her scent, for the anchor that is no longer there. A few minutes ago, he started throwing himself against my bedroom door. The wood is splintering. He's stronger than I could have imagined. This isn't grief. It's something else. The cure didn't just bring him back. It twisted him into something that cannot live without the object of his grief. The recording's final words are echoing in my head. Our final recommendation is euthanasia. Kill him. Kill my own father. I don't know what to do. The police, they'll just see a sick, violent old man. They'll take him to a psychiatric hospital. He could hurt someone. He could hurt himself. He's in so much pain, a pain so much worse than the quiet fading he was in before. Is it the merciful thing to do? The banging on the door is getting louder. The wood is cracking. He's going to get in soon. I don't have much time. What do I do? What in God's name do I do? Story 8. I heard whispers in my walls. Sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear the strangest sounds in my house. At first, it was just little scratches and creaks. I dismissed them as old house sounds, or only in my mind as I'm halfway into a dream. But the more I listened, the creepier they became. The noises even seemed to be moving around my house. One night, right as I lay down in bed, I heard a low voice growling. I shot up, "Who's there?" Silence. I stood perfectly still for ages, listening intently. But now it was dead quiet. I pulled my phone out of my purse and started to dial the police. But I then thought about it for a moment. An image rushed in my mind, the police swarming down here to confront what turned out to just be some rats or a wandering squirrel. I instead decided to call an exterminator. Blackthorn Pest Control, how can I help you? Hi. I've been hearing some weird noises coming from my house lately. Scratching sounds in the walls. And I thought I just heard something growling. I see. And have you noticed any visual signs, ma'am? Have you seen any scratches or droppings? Any food gone missing or anything like that? Yes, actually. I gulped as I realized I thought I had some leftovers the other day, but when I went and checked, they were gone. Leftovers. The man's voice wavered. As in inside your fridge? Yeah, I said. Is that weird? Let me tell you what. Give me your address and phone number, and we can send someone down there on Tuesday to take a look around. I gave him my information and hung up the phone. The confusion in his voice at the end had me even more worried. I reached back into my purse and pulled out a can of pepper spray. I wasn't sure how well it would work against an animal, but I gripped it tightly in case of something larger lurking. I checked every room of the house, which didn't take long. It was only a 2-bedroom rental, with the second being used as an office. I searched both rooms, then the kitchen and all the cupboards. Nothing. I slowly crept into the final room, the bathroom. I inched toward the shower curtain with my heart racing, pepper spray ready in my other hand, and yanked the curtain to the side. Still nothing. I let out a heavy breath and felt like a moron, getting worked up for nothing. I went back into my room and sat on the bed. But as I sat there in deep thought, the closet door caught my eye. It wasn't fully closed. I shuddered. I could swear it was closed before I left the room. My heart rate jumped back up as I clutched the pepper spray. There was no way, right? I slowly walked toward the door and yanked it open. All that was inside were my clothes and a few stacks of boxes from moving in. I hadn't finished unpacking, so most of my stuff was still in those boxes. I pushed some of them aside to check the corners of the closet for signs of rodents, but something else made me stop dead in my tracks. At the back of the closet, there was a small panel in the wall. It was so thin and subtle that I had never noticed it before. I pressed it in. It slid back to open a secret compartment. A rancid smell hit me first, like sweat and rotting food. Then, from the darkness, something shifted. A hand. No. Fingers, curling around the edge of the hole. My breath caught as a pair of sunken eyes met mine. A lanky and scraggly bearded man slowly crawled out of the hole. He glared up at me with a demented smile. I screamed again and dropped the pepper spray. I turned and ran out of the room, down the hallway and out the front door. I kept running and screaming through the grass and past my neighbors until my throat and legs were sore. The image of the dirty, old man's smile was permanently burned into my mind. Later, the police told me that the homeless man had been secretly living in my house for weeks. He somehow found a way in undetected. I moved far away and tried to forget all about that place and that man. Many months passed, but I struggled to sleep at night even in my new, safer neighborhood with a home security system. I told myself it was over, that it was a once-in-a-lifetime horrific event. But last night, I woke to a soft creak from my closet door. It was open just an inch. Story 9. My friends say I've been visiting them at night. I haven't left my house in weeks. So I bought this mirror at a flea market about 3 weeks ago. It was old and heavy, with a carved wooden frame that had gone through multiple restorations. It smelled faintly damp. The seller told me it came from an estate sale. I naturally thought it would make my bare apartment feel less empty. The first night I set up, I noticed something strange. When I passed in the dark, my reflection didn't quite match. My face looked distorted and wrong, and my mouth was forced into uncomfortably stretched lips. But then I realized that was how glass worked reflections in bad lighting. I used to have a lot of fun with this weird trick and the bathroom mirror when I was a child. For a few days, it behaved like a normal mirror, as it should have. Nothing was magical about it. It just did a good job filling the empty space by the cabinet in my bedroom. Sometime a week later, I caught movement in the corner of my eye and realized that I was standing in the mirror even though I was in the corridor leading to the room. Light couldn't bend that far. Another time, I walked past it and somehow the reflection hesitated, just a beat. Before following, I stopped looking directly at it after that. It weirded me out so much. I convinced myself I was just seeing things for quite some time. The reflection did not misbehave too. However, once in broad daylight, I found myself staring at the mirror just too long. Felt this weird attraction. I broke contact when fear got the better of me, specifically when I realized that the scare in my eyes looked stark, uncannily white. It creeped me out. The next morning, Friday, I brushed it off and tried to throw myself back into work. I was already running late when I finally made it into the office. I hadn't even sat down at my desk when one of my coworkers slid past with a weird look on his face. "You were in the bathroom on our floor this morning," he said, like he couldn't believe he was saying it. Just standing there, staring. Wouldn't answer me. Kind of freaked me out. I froze. I had been back at home until 20 minutes before. That day drifted by. I even visited the bathroom myself to check if my reflection did dirty its weird tricks. Nothing was overtly unusual other than the weird lag to my movements. That was persistent. Later that night, the call started. My phone woke me with a buzz sometime close to 3:47 a.m., like a warning in my palm. I fumbled for it. I had 11 missed calls, all from my friend Maria, miles away from where I lived. My thumb blurred as I flipped through them. 9 in the last 20 minutes, and 2 from earlier that night. Her name had never looked so frantic on my screen. I hit play on the newest voicemail she left me. She didn't respond to any of the calls I sent further. Her voice burst out of the speaker before the beep, a ragged sound, half sentence, half scream. "Stop, please, stop ringing the bells. What are you doing?" Under her words was another sound, numerous high metallic rings, paced too evenly, quite deliberately at first. The next voicemail. "Pick up the phone. This isn't funny. Drew, I can see you on the ring. Stop it. Stop it. Why are you grinning at me? Stop. Oh God, please. I won't open the door. Stop." The words were all breath and nails, panicked. The rings were unnaturally placed now, too rapid for human fingers to place. I fear I heard a massive door crash open by the end of the clip. I texted her, tried calling her back. No response. No blue ticks, no typing. My chest lugged its own panic. Just then, in the darkness of my room, I saw something move in the doorway as I rested my phone. A wedge of shadow shaped like a person, standing perfectly still at the threshold of my room where the corridor light died. The silhouette tightened, shoulders ahead, but it didn't breathe. It slowly crawled away from the door, almost crab-walking disjointly, its way out by the wall. Needless to say, I was too traumatized to catch any sleep that night. The timely, gentle knocking on the mirror, repeating after every few minutes, didn't help either. My back turned to it. I didn't dare to look back. I felt like I was being watched. The following morning, Saturday, was nothing less than getting caught in a pile of unread messages. Maria still didn't reply back. I was deeply concerned. However, my messaging app was now flooded with dozens of messages from countless familiars, friends and family miles away, all asking the same thing in 100 different tones of annoyance, confusion, and fear. What the hell was I doing at their house last night? my cousin in Boston. Drew, if this is your idea of a joke, it's just not funny. You scare my kids. An old college roommate, 40 miles over. Dude, you good? What's going on? I won't mind you dropping by at all, but breaking in and running away is not funny. A message followed by paragraphs of stuff he claimed I did. Many more messages. I tried to deny them all. It wasn't physically possible for me to be at so many different places at once. One of my friends sent me a small clip demanding explanation. It was a shot from a front door, and pressed against a narrow glass panel beside was my face. The scare of my eyes were stark, unnaturally white, just like I had seen in the mirror previously. A jarring grin etched in my face, eyes that followed the camera. Just standing, observing. By the end of the clip itself, from the opposite angle, I disappeared into thin air. I was no longer there. I spent the rest of Saturday and Sunday in a frantic haze, calling and texting everyone who had contacted me. I tried to plead that I was not guilty, begged for forgiveness, even reasoned so far as to making a group chat and listing out all the messages I received to show how it was just not possible for me to pull all of this in one night. I gained some trust after that, but the question still remained unresolved. How? Who or what? By Sunday night, defeated and utterly alone, I had the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the thickest, mustiest blanket from my closet, the one I had never used, and just threw it over the mirror, tucking the edges behind the frame until the entire thing was shrouded. For the next 3 days, I got no more calls or texts. No more uncanny reports of me standing outside their windows at night or breaking in. Was it some bizarre, shared delusion? Maybe covering the mirror had worked. Maybe it was over. Maybe. Last night, I almost slept through the night for the first time in a week. However, I was jolted awake by a sound from the corner of my bedroom. A soft thump, followed by the sound of heavy fabric slithering to the floor. My blood ran cold. I sat up in bed, tense, only to see that the blanket was off the mirror now. However, my face looked disoriented. Eyes seemed to twitch, and an uncanny grin curled my lips in a lasting reflection. I wasn't making any faces. Just then, I heard a sharp chime. The doorbell, a single, sharp, deliberate press. My phone buzzed. A motion alert from the smart doorbell. And there it was, my own face, warped by the wide-angle lens, staring directly into the camera. That awful, stretched grin plastered across its features. It wasn't moving, just waiting yet again patiently. I didn't dare to get up and open the door. The ringing picked up pace, almost as fast as one of those vintage iron alarm clocks, a frantic metallic peal that vibrated through the walls. As I got up to examine the corridor that led to the living room, the shadow figure perched at its end, a featureless silhouette blocking my only way out. As soon as I had acknowledged it, the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more worse. Then I heard it again, that soft, rhythmic knocking coming from the mirror right behind me. I turned hesitantly, and there was my reflection, anticipating this moment, grinning, its eyes almost protruding from its skull. It was posed as if on the verge of leaping right through the glass. I had enough of this. That was not my reflection, just something pretending to be it. I picked up the heavy metal lamp from my nightstand. The base was solid iron, cold and unforgiving in my strong grip. The moment my fingers closed around it, the shadow at the end of the hall surged forward at an unnatural pace. I had a split second, no time to think, only to act. I spun and hurled the lamp with all my strength at the grinning face in the mirror. The shriek of tortured glass was instantaneous. The mirror didn't just break, it exploded. A concussive blast of force and glittering shrapnel burst outward. I threw my arms up, but it was useless. The force tripped me back against the bed as 1,000 hot needles dug into my arms, my face, my chest. The noise died, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I lay there, gasping, the coppery taste of blood in my mouth. The air smelled of ozone. Slowly, I pushed myself to a sitting position. My bedroom was a disaster. A carpet of glittering, razor-sharp shards covered everything. The wall was empty. The shadow in the hallway was gone. It was over. A wave of painful, profound relief washed over me. It had to be over. My rage gave way to a throbbing, aching reality. Looking down, I saw dozens of deep, bleeding cuts on my skin. A long shard of glass was embedded in my forearm. After a moment of calm, clear thought, I carefully wrapped my arm in a towel, grabbed my keys, and drove myself to the ER. Hours later, stitched and bandaged, I finally stumbled back into my apartment. The exhaustion was bone deep. I didn't feel like sleeping in my bedroom anymore. It was a mess. It didn't feel safe either. I just locked the front door, fell into the couch in my living room, trying to rest myself. The painkillers dragged me down into a drowsy, dreamless haze. I was finally safe. I don't know how long I slept, but as my consciousness started to surface abruptly from my slumber, I felt something coldly familiar, that sense of being watched. My eyelids felt heavy as lead, but I forced them open one last time before drifting off completely. And there, standing perfectly still in the darkness of the corridor to my room, was a familiar wedge of shadow shaped like a person. Though it was gone in a blink, I don't really know what made it stay, but I fear it's not leaving anytime soon. Story 10. Lamb Eyes. Your oldest friend is not always your best friend. At the time, I thought he might be. When I was a child, I had a friend who I would play with in the backyard. Sometimes he was a boy. Sometimes he was an animal. If he ever got angry, he became something else entirely. We got along because he was just like me, lonely and strange. No one would go near him. No one would even look at him. It was like he was invisible. I first met him behind the slide on my elementary school playground. He was crouched in the damp with chips, shaking. His curly white head was all spotted with red. I thought he was a hurt baby animal. I crawled under the plastic jungle gym, reaching out to him tentatively, and felt his hot breath ghost the back of my wrist. When he looked up at me wildly, his eyes were human. I wasn't scared. I took him home in a cardboard box and cleaned his wounds. I fed him from a bottle and stroked his fleece while I read him storybooks about fairy queens and brave paupers and lovers lost in the woods. The days went by and his wounds closed up. Soon he could stand on his own. I tried to keep him in a pen in the yard, but he got too strong to be held and broke out in the night. One morning, I tugged on my rubber boots and ran out to feed him, the dew clinging to my legs as I tore through the sedges. The chicken wire pen had been split open from the inside. I huddled there in the wet grass and cried until my mother came to comfort me. "He'll come back," she whispered, stroking my hair. "Just you wait." I tried to forget him, but whenever I was supposed to be filling out a worksheet or quietly reading to myself in class, my mind wandered. I would imagine what my little lamb was doing out there all alone. I wondered if he was hurt again. I pictured him covered in bite marks and scratches, bleeding pitifully and stumbling over roots. A bleeding beacon in the dark woods. On kinder days, I pictured him frolicking and well-fed on a farm somewhere, growing stronger every day. I hoped he was happy, wherever he was. 3 weeks later, I was hiding beneath my covers to read a book past my bedtime when I heard it. A soft tapping. A boy stood outside my window, drawing spirals on the humid glass with a dirty finger. His white hair was long and tangled with thistles and weeds, his face a mottled tapestry of deep scars. It reminded me of the bark of an old oak tree. The boy's eyes were a soft shade of amber, with pupils like tiny square windows. They bulged strangely beneath long, pale eyelashes. Lamb eyes. I knew it was him. This is how I came to know my oldest friend. I will call him F. I let F in without a thought. He was trembling. At first I thought he might be cold. Then sticky summer air drifted through the open window, and I realized that he was starving. The sharp slats of his ribs protruded from an equally mottled torso. When he turned to shut the window behind him, I saw the sharp spikes of vertebrae running down his back, disappearing into the threadbare red cloth wrapped around his waist. So I fed him. I didn't know what boys in the forest ate, but I did my best. I led F into the dark kitchen and made him my favorite sandwich, peanut butter and banana with honey drizzle on both sides. He devoured it in seconds with a lack of manners that made me laugh. I was messily trying to make hot cocoa from a box mix when he spoke the first time. "How do you like your hot chocolate?" I'd asked, shaking a clump of cocoa powder from a foil packet. "I like tons of marshmallows." "Like you?" I almost missed the words, soft and crackling like dead leaves crushing underfoot. I dropped a fistful of mini marshmallows into both of our mugs. F seemed satisfied with this. He watched me closely as I took a sip of my cocoa, then followed my lead. It was still too hot. I flinched, bringing the mug away from my lips, then blew across the surface, puffing steam away from the rim. He did the same. F took to copying my every move. It was like he was learning how to be a kid for the first time. It threw me off at first, the way he trailed behind me without a sound, but this quickly turned to a familiar sort of comfort. He became my shadow. I decided to give him a tour of the house, careful not to wake my parents. This was well before my mother left, and my father started to work long night shifts. I'd often get reprimanded for creeping to the house at night, when I couldn't sleep, wandering around and around like a little poltergeist, until Dad flicked the light switch and caught me in the act. I showed F the dusty secret nook full of spiders under the stairs, and my favorite hide and seek spots behind the doors. I warned him about the creakiest floorboards, so we could sneak past without a sound. I showed him the gap beneath the stove where roof rats would sometimes squeeze through to feast on crumbs. We held our breath and watched one creep out onto the kitchen tiles, turn a circle cautiously, and meander over to eat a bit of sandwich crust that had fallen earlier. Beside me, F was trembling again. I wondered if he was afraid, but when I looked, I saw that his jaw had hinged open at an uncanny angle, exposing sharp white teeth that dripped with saliva. He was fixated on the rat. Before I could hold him back, he leaped forward and grabbed the rat in his teeth. There was a sickening crack of fragile bones. He ate it. I was reminded of the pet king snake in my classroom, how it contorted around its frozen prey. I watched the rodent's carcass slide down, becoming a distended lump in his throat before vanishing into his gut. When F turned toward me again, his face was distorted, animal. I felt a little sick, but I was not afraid. Observing him fulfilled the same sort of animal curiosity as watching the king snake in its tank or one of those nature documentaries on Animal Planet. I had suspected that F wasn't a normal boy anyway. I asked if he wanted me to read a book to him. He agreed, his face cracking into a smile I recognized as human once again. We built a small fort from my sheets and huddled inside. F sat cross-legged beside me, holding a small green camping lantern to illuminate the pages while I practiced my reading skills. He drank up every word in silence, only broken by the occasional soft laugh or gasp in response. I hadn't realized how much time had passed until the hazy light of dawn was filtering through the sheets. We heard my mom knock on my door. F shot up in a panic. He threw open the window and clambered onto the sill. I remember asking if I'd ever see him again. He just stared at me with those wide prey eyes, his jaw set. Then he fled into my backyard once more. Mom came into my room to help me get ready for school. As I picked out my clothes, brushed my teeth, and ate cereal at the kitchen table across from my parents, I thought of everything they did not know, of the secret friend I had made while they slept. My bones were indescribably heavy, but my mind felt light. The night felt like a far-off dream, the details melting away with every passing minute of sunlight. But I knew the boy with lamb eyes was real. He had to be. The next night he came back, and the next, By third grade, I was visiting my friend in the woods almost every night. After a few too close calls of my parents catching him creeping around the house, I decided that he would have to stay outside. My parents argued often these days, mainly in hushed tones on the other side of doors. I could never pick out the words, just the bitterness. If things got unbearable, I would creep out of my bedroom window, just as F had done on that first night, and take off running into the shadow of the woods beyond our lawn. F would be waiting with a new game. Sometimes we scaled the towering magnolia tree at the edge of the property. Climbing until the world felt far away and small. I could never reach the top, but F would always go for the highest boughs, his thin body disappearing beyond the waxy leaves and seed pods. A few times, he popped back out and scared me so badly, I almost lost my grip on the slick bark. Then he laughed, and I had to laugh too, adrenaline rushing through my veins. There was an edge of cruelness to the way he played. I didn't see it so clearly back then. Another time, F brought me to an abandoned well deep in the forest. We had been hiking for an hour, at least, when we came upon the clearing where it stood all alone. It was a simple stone structure covered by a small slanted roof. A rope swayed from the rotten wood where a bucket had once been tied. The air smelled sweet and damp, like overripe fruit and rot. Kudzu blanketed the trees and tumbled down into the clearing like tresses of tangled hair. F leaped onto the side of the well with a recklessness that made my heart jump, keeping his balance crouched there on the stones. He called for me to join him. When I approached, he pulled me up to sit on the rim. "This is my wishing well," he said. "Do you like it?" Recently, he'd been speaking more, borrowing phrases from my own vocabulary and the chapter books I read to him. I nodded. Those amber animal eyes bored deep into my own. "Do you ever wish for something and want it very, very badly?" I thought about it. There were some things I wished for very often, but I couldn't say. I wish my mother was more like her old self, back before the rumors and sickness took root. And yet, I also wished I was more like my mother. She didn't seem to mind if people found her strange. At this age, I had become acutely aware that I was somehow different. My classmates almost never spoke to me. When they did, the corners of their mouths curled up like I just told them a joke without knowing it. I sat alone most days, reading or drawing or staring into space. I often dreamed of being stolen away from my home to another world where people were more like me, a world where I wouldn't be a moth in a butterfly garden. To speak these thoughts would be to make them real, though. I shrugged. "I don't know. Do you have a wish?" The intensity of F's gaze scorched me. It was too much. I wanted to go home. Finally, he looked away, peering into the dark mouth of the well. I wish I was not so hungry. F was always hungry. In the time I'd known him, he'd gone from feeding on rats and loose scraps around the house to larger things. I'd seen him hunched in the tall grass outside of my window, devouring the live flesh of a sick, bleeding deer until his bones glistened white beneath the moon. He always turned away when he ate, or else waited until he thought I wasn't around. A sort of guilt preceded the act. I didn't know what to say. I looked into the depths of the well. All I could see was an inky void. When I angled my flashlight down, the beam was swallowed up before it touched the bottom. I took a penny from my pocket and held it over the well. It was a lucky one. I'd found it glittering from a crack in the sidewalk by the diner. I would make F's wish, I decided. Anything to stop the sadness that blanketed him like a pelt. Before I could drop the coin, F snatched my wrist. She wouldn't like that. My friend sounded so sharp, so angry. He was hurting me. Ooh. I challenged. Tears pricked my eyes. There were rules to this game that I didn't know, and I was breaking them. Then he paused, brow furrowed. He was searching for the right word. "The Queen!" My mind conjured images of royalty from my old fairy tales. Beautiful figures of royalty swathed in spider silk robes and adorned with crowns of flowers. Once he was sure that I would not drop the coin, F let my wrist go. Tiny red crescents filled with blood where his nails had broken skin. "She likes half-living things," he said softly. "Things are almost dead." Sitting there beside him on the edge of the well, my stomach felt strange. F rested a hand on my shoulder. I remember my body lurching. Then the world was a kaleidoscope. Light, color, and sound twisted into an incomprehensible blur, and I was falling. I don't know how it happened. I don't know if I lost my balance, or if F pushed me. I do know that I could have died that day in the woods with no one else around. My broken body would have been left there in the damp and dark until the flesh dropped from my bones. I know that he caught me by the arm. The blood rushed to my head as I dangled over the pit. It smelled of wet moss and rot. My shoulder ached in its socket from being yanked with such sudden force. I struggled to find a foothold on the inner edge of the well, my sneakers slipping against the wet stone. When I looked up at F, his face held no emotion at all. At least nothing I could comprehend. An inhuman blankness. At that moment, for perhaps the first time since meeting him, I wondered if my friend would really bring harm to me. I pleaded for help. What else could I do? He could have let go like it was nothing at all. Maybe that's why I did not cry, or even think to scream. I didn't want to spook him. I asked again. Still, I did not raise my voice. F stared back with that inscrutable face. It was like calming a fright-prone horse. I was reminded of the ones at the stable down the road from my house. My entire arm burned from holding my body's weight for so long. After what felt like ages, F relented. He grabbed my other arm and helped me out of the well without a word. I collapsed, letting sweet grass and solid ground cradle my body as I caught my breath. I could hear F saying something distantly. It sounded like an apology. When I opened my eyes, I realized that he was not addressing me. I don't know why I thought he would. He never said sorry to me. Not once. The boy from the woods was whispering into the well.